Inside a locked storage drawer in a museum archive, under cold fluorescent light, lies a limestone relief panel most visitors will never see. A raking lamp catches its lower edge, and a band of small, repeated wave marks throws hard shadows across the stone. The label reads Ceremonial Offering Scene, but the marks beneath it repeat at almost exactly the same interval, over and over, unbroken, across the entire panel. No prayer does that. No decoration behaves that precisely. You are about to see what this line actually shows, why the ritual explanation collapses the moment you measure it, and what modern acoustics accidentally confirmed. Start with the wide shot, a carved panel, Old Kingdom in style, pyramid adjacent in context, 2 registers. On top, figures standing beside a cylindrical object, connected to a second figure by cord-like carved lines. Below, a narrow band of repeating wave-shaped marks running the full width of the stone. The museum catalog calls the whole thing a ritual tableau, an offering scene, the cylinder read as a ceremonial vessel or a stylized column, the cords read as symbolic tethers of protection. That reading isn't stupid. Egyptologists had good reason to reach for it. Dynastic Egypt didn't have a vocabulary for machine or instrument. When something didn't fit a known category, it went into the only drawer available, religion. That's not malice. That's how classification works when you're missing a word. But that is not the strange part. Look at the lower register again. In actual ritual carving, decorative borders vary. The artist's hand drifts, the spacing breathes, symbols repeat with natural inconsistency because they're symbolic, not measured. This band doesn't do that. The marks sit apart from each other with a regularity that survives across every known copy of this motif. That kind of consistency doesn't happen by accident in freehand religious art. It happens when someone is trying to represent something with a fixed interval, a repeating rhythm, a countable frequency, something that behaves the same way every single time it's carved. This is where the official story starts to crack. Push in on the waveband. Isolate it. Magnify it. The catalog description calls it a decorative border, filler beneath the real scene above. But filler isn't disciplined. Filler wanders. This band doesn't wander. It holds its spacing edge to edge, corner to corner, with a consistency that any working artist would find harder to fake than to simply carve straight. Overlay the measurement on screen, and the spacing locks in at close to the same interval. Mark after mark, no exceptions. Not damaged, not missing. Complete, and that's the problem. A decorative flourish. This precise stops behaving like decoration. It starts behaving like a notation. This is where the official story breaks. Now, go back to the upper register and look at what's actually touching what. The cord-like lines don't drape the way ceremonial tethers drape in comparable religious scenes elsewhere. In the same period, they don't sag, they don't curve with gravity, they don't vary artist to artist. They meet the cylinder at the same fixed angle every time the motif is copied. In genuine symbolic art, angle is a matter of taste. In this motif, angle is a constant. That's not how a metaphor gets carved. That's how a measurement gets carved. Not a tether. Not decoration. An angle that repeats like it was measured. Not felt. The next clue is smaller, but more dangerous. Look at the standing figure beside the cylinder, the one the catalog calls a worshipper. In genuine reverence, poses across Egyptian relief work. Hands rise, palms open, arms lift toward the object of devotion. That's the recognizable grammar of prayer. This figure's hand does something else. It's placed flat against the cylinder's surface, fingers spread, weight pressed in rather than lifted up. That's not a gesture of worship. That's a gesture of contact. The kind you make when you're holding something steady, not when you're honoring something sacred. Not a worshiper. A hand placed like it's holding something steady. The official explanation survives only if you stop looking here. Because once you put these 3 details together, the fixed angle cord, the flat controlling hand, the mechanically regular waveband underneath, you're no longer looking at a scene about devotion. You're looking at a scene that behaves like a diagram, a source object, a channel connecting it to an operator, and beneath both, a repeating notation that might be recording exactly what that channel was meant to carry. Not a priest, an operator. Not a prayer. A procedure written in the only vocabulary the carvers had. Here's where it gets worse, because this isn't where the trail stops. It's where a second kind of evidence enters evidence that doesn't come from Egypt at all. In modern acoustics labs, researchers can drive a plate or a surface at a precise frequency and watch loose particles on it organize themselves into repeating bands, not randomly, but in fixed, rhythmic patterns dictated entirely by the sound. It's called a standing wave, and it's been demonstrated for over a century, refined more recently into work on acoustic levitation, where controlled sound fields can suspend and shift small objects without anyone touching them. None of this is fringe science. It's reproducible, filmed, published. Here's the part that should bother you. The pattern those standing waves produce regular, evenly spaced bands, locked to a fixed interval, is visually almost identical to the wave band carved beneath this scene. And the setup those experiments require a source generating the vibration, a defined channel or medium carrying it, an operator controlling the input is structurally the same arrangement carved in the upper register: cylinder, cord, hand. Modern science does not prove the ancient machine. It proves the principle is real. Nobody is claiming a lab today moves a 10-ton limestone block with sound. What the lab demonstrates is smaller a grain of sand, a scattering of powder, rearranging itself into exactly the kind of repeating pattern carved into this stone thousands of years before anyone had the mathematics to explain why it happens. The scale is unresolved. The overlap is not. And that overlap is specific enough that dismissing it as coincidence takes more effort than taking it seriously. Modern science does not solve this mystery. It makes it worse, because now the documentation problem stops being abstract. An early 20th century survey team documented this panel with real care. Their plate reproduces the waveband accurately enough that you can count every mark from the drawing alone, which means whoever drew it saw the regularity. You don't draw something that precisely by accident. And yet the accompanying notes describe the lower register in exactly 4 words: border pattern, decorative element. Nothing about the spacing, nothing about the consistency. The person who recorded this anomaly recorded it perfectly and then walked straight past it. The record does not deny the clue. It simply steps around it. It gets stranger. A published translation of this panel exists, and it's thorough. The upper register, the offering language, the figures, all rendered carefully into English. And then it stops. The lower register, the waveband, isn't translated at all, not flagged as illegible, not marked as damaged, just absent, as if the translator's attention simply ended at the exact line where the pattern starts behaving like something other than art. This is the part most summaries leave out. And here's the quiet part. This panel isn't on public display. It sits in storage, cataloged under a general heading for ritual objects, not because someone decided to hide it, but because the classification system built for cataloging Egyptian antiquities has a box for religious items and doesn't have a box for anything else. There's no cartoon villain here, no locked door conspiracy, no secret committee. There's a bureaucracy that had one available label and used it the same way it's used that label for a century on anything it didn't have a better word for. The evidence is not destroyed. It is categorized into harmlessness. That is how something this specific survives in plain sight for decades without ever becoming a problem, not by being hidden, but by being filed somewhere nobody thinks to look twice. And that is when the first image from the drawer stops looking ancient and starts looking unfinished. Go back to where we started. The drawer, the cold light, the wave band catching a raking shadow. You're looking at the exact same object you saw at the beginning of this file, except now you can't see it the same way. The band beneath the scene isn't a border anymore. It's a notation whose interval nobody has ever explained. The cord isn't a symbolic tether anymore. It's a line, meeting a cylinder at an angle too consistent to be artistic accident. The hand isn't raised in worship anymore. It's flat, controlling, steady. None of this proves a lost machine existed. That's not the claim. The official reading still explains plenty: the setting, the surrounding offering language, the broader ritual context of the site. What it doesn't explain is the one detail it has to skip to stay intact: a repeating pattern too regular for religious art, sitting directly beneath a scene where a hand rests on an object exactly the way you'd rest a hand on something you were trying to hold steady while it worked. The dangerous part was never certainty. The dangerous part is fit the fact that a supposedly ceremonial image lines up, piece by piece, with the structure of a process modern physics can actually demonstrate. The panel is still in that drawer. The label still says ritual. The wave band is still spaced exactly the way it was carved, unbroken, into stone that has outlasted every institution that has ever tried to explain it away. Nobody has translated the line beneath the scene. Nobody has remeasured it in public. Nobody has moved it out of that storage box and asked, seriously, on the record, why a piece of decoration behaves like it was drawn with a ruler and a frequency in mind. The stone hasn't changed since the day it was carved. You have. And the question underneath that band of marks is still exactly where it's always been, waiting for someone with the right access and the nerve to finally ask it out loud.